Indeed, recording is in progress, and this is our penultimate. It seems weird saying it. Penultimate I meditate session. This one is live. The last one is going to be recorded because I'm on my corporate company away day thing on Wednesday, um, over in Warwickshire. But we will do a get together within the next couple of weeks as well. Um, so Wednesdays will be pre-recorded. So that means we're kind of getting close now to the final workshop, and we look back through the past several weeks. There's a kind of underlying logic that works through everything that brings us to the point we're at tonight. We began by looking at how we're not broken, and then loosening the stories that we mistake for truths, and then looked at stopping treating the different parts of ourselves as enemies. We explored who we might be beneath the roles we've learned to perform. And last week we looked at fear, not as something simply to defeat, but as something we can listen to without automatically allowing it to make decisions. And tonight, the aim is that all of this comes into relationship. Because it's one thing to discover yourself when you're sitting quietly with your eyes closed. And it's another thing entirely to remain yourself when another human being is standing in front of you, or you're having to deal with this, that, and the other that's going on in life. And that really is where the work gets interesting. It's easy to be authentic when we're alone. There's nobody to disappoint, nobody misunderstands us, nobody looks at us strangely, although I have pulled some strange expressions at myself in the mirror in the past. Uh, but nobody withdraws, nobody says no. Relationship introduces, I think, um, an element of risk, I would say. And because relationship introduces an element of risk, it also introduces protection. We learn ways of keeping ourselves safe with people. You know, perhaps someone becomes agreeable, or they develop a sense of humor, and they try to be funny in certain situations as a means of protection. Some people will become very self-sufficient as a way of protecting themselves from those dealings with other people. Um, some people will explain everything. Some people will just hide away and disappear. Um, some people become the peacekeeper. Or maybe we become extremely good at noticing the first sign that somebody might leave and begin reacting before they've actually gone anywhere. Or we're almost trying to predict the future and react according to what we think's going to happen. Doesn't mean we've always got it right. And again, none of these things necessarily doesn't mean there's anything wrong with us. They usually make sense when we understand where they come from, but they can also create a strange paradox. The very things we learn to do in order to preserve relationship can eventually stop relationships becoming intimate. We want to be loved, but we only allow it to show the parts we believe are lovable. We want to understand, but we hide the things we're afraid we hide the things we're afraid will not be accepted. We want closeness, but perhaps the closer somebody gets, the more vulnerable we feel, and the more some old protective movement or mechanism begins. And then we wonder why maybe we feel alone or a bit distant. So tonight's not about looking at tricks for better communication. We've all seen those, and we've looked at lots of different things to do with communication on the use of words over the years. Um, So it's not going to be use this phrase or mirror this person to build a better rapport, making good eye contact. My favorite one ever, and I think I shared this years back when I first heard it. It was a great way of starting. In NLP especially, they talk about building rapport. And according to Igor Ledochowski, one of the best ways you can build rapport is to do this. Because apparently it's one of the first things we do as human beings when we recognize someone, we'll raise an eyebrow. It's really weird to do it consciously. Uh, we'll raise an eyebrow as a way of just going. And apparently, if we do that in our communications when we meet people, um, it can help build rapport quicker. Um, I mean, Igor looks odd at the best of times, but if I was to sit there and have him go, I'd be worried. I'd be worried. Um, these things can be useful, but there is something much more, much deeper beneath them. And that I think is presence, the willingness to be with another human being without immediately trying to manage what they think, fix what they feel, defend against what they might say, or prepare our own response before they've even finished speaking. And perhaps equally important, the willingness to remain in contact with yourself whilst you are with them, whilst you're with other people. Because authentic relationship needs both. If I'm completely absorbed in myself, I cannot meet you. I'm a bit croaky tonight. I was singing at the weekend, so you have to forgive me. Um, if I abandon myself completely in order to meet you, I'm not really there either. So on one hand, if I'm completely self-absorbed, I can't meet you. I can't be there with you. But if I'm completely abandoned, then I'm not there to meet you either. Relationships happen somewhere between those two. I remain here, you remain there, and something can pass honestly between us. And this is kind of what we're going to look at tonight. How we learn to relate. I don't think any of us learns the fine art of relationship from a book. We learn it by living inside relationships. We cannot be alive and not be in relationship with anything and everything. It's just quite a mad thought when you think about it. Now I've got the plants here. I'm in a relationship with these plants because I have to water them. I have to make sure they're not getting too much sun when they're by the window and move them around and things. I'm in a relationship with them. I'm in a relationship with my chair. I mean, everything that we connect to, everything that's in our lives, we are in some form of relationship with. And long before we start looking at things like attachment theory and communications and boundaries and nervous system, what, the nervous system is learning, before we learn what I'm upset, when I'm upset, what happens? Does somebody come? Do they become angry? Do they disappear? Am I comforted? Am I told not to make a fuss? Do I have to become louder before anybody even notices me? Do I have to become quieter to keep everybody calm? Do I have to put myself aside and do everything for everybody else first? Or do I have to be selfish so people go, oh, look at this person? So many things. And we learn these rules really early. Not necessarily because somebody sits us down and explains them. I don't think anyone ever really has done that greatly. Um, but we learn through repetition. And then because human beings are very clever, we adapt. If closeness seems uncertain, perhaps we become highly alert to every change in another person. If closeness feels overwhelming or unreliable, perhaps we learn not to need too much. If expressing our emotion creates difficulty, perhaps we keep our emotions to ourselves. And if being useful receives love, perhaps useful becomes the role. None of these are moral failures, they are just solutions. But we can carry those solutions into relationships which operate by entirely different rules. And this is where things like attachment theory can be useful, not as another identity. I hate, well, and we should never identify by these things. So, you know, don't don't finish this by today by thinking, well, I'm avoidant. That explains everything, because that's just another map. Yeah, we don't identify by the solution. Um, Attachment patterns are better understood as tendencies, ways the nervous system has learned to manage closeness, uncertainty, and dependence, and those patterns can alter. We can learn new experiences of relationship. We can become safer with people. We can become safer with ourselves. But the main first step is recognizing what happens. So what happens when connection feels threatened? Think for a moment about what happens when you feel insecure in a relationship. It doesn't necessarily have to be a romantic relationship. It can be a friendship. It can be family. It can be work. Any relationship that matters. Maybe someone seems distant and they say something which lands a bit bad, or they don't reply to something, or they appear disappointed, or you end up thinking you've done something wrong. What happens in you? What happens in you? Now, there may be a tendency to move towards, so to seek reassurance, to explain, to check, to message again, or you become extremely attentive to the other person's mood, or perhaps you move away. And so you become quieter. You tell yourself you don't care. You stop sharing. Become very self-contained. Or perhaps you move against. So maybe you criticize, you defend, you become angry. You act first, that you do not have to experience the vulnerability underneath. These are basic and sometimes crude categories. Real people move between them, but notice the underlying movement. The underlying movement in these situations is towards, away, and against. Towards, away, and against. And perhaps beneath all three is probably a similar fear. Something in this connection feels uncertain. And when something in this connection feels uncertain, we either move towards the person, away from the person, or against the person. Those are the protective parts that can come forward. And here's something important. The protective behavior can create the very thing it fears. If I desperately seek reassurance, the other person may feel crowded. If I withdraw, they may assume I'm uninterested. Or if because maybe I feel hurt, go on the attack, they may defend against themselves rather than seeing the hurt underneath. And then I will receive their reaction as proof that my original fear was correct. So it's almost self-perpetuating, self-fulfilling. And this is why relationship patterns can feel so convincing. We do not realize we're participating in creating the very evidence that our old map is expecting. It does not mean we cause everything that happens in relationships. It always takes two people. Sometimes somebody genuinely behaves like an arse. My notes say badly, but like an arse. We all know what I'm talking about. And sometimes a relationship is simply not healthy. But when we become aware of our own movement, we gain something we did not have before. When we're aware of that towards, away, or attack, or against, less harsh. When we're aware of those three movements and we begin to notice them in our interactions, we then move towards having choice. I'm trying to think back through the last 6 years. I'm sure we did stuff on rapport in the past. It's always been something I've slightly avoided. Just because I find quite a lot of the stuff out there quite cheesy, like the eyebrow thing. Rapport is not mimicry. Their NLP especially made a great deal over rapport, about matching somebody's body posture. So if someone's talking to you like this, you stand there like this. If they then move like this, you then move like this. It's a terrible way of teaching it. Matching someone's breathing, so looking at the rise and fall of their chest and bringing your breathing in sync with theirs. Matching the pitch and the timing of their voice, the rhythm of their voice. And to a point, all of these things can all influence connection. But somewhere along the way, rapport became almost a technique rather than something that just happens. John Chase, bless him, one of my one of my first mentors in the whole kind of hypnosis and coaching thing. He wrote a brilliant book, um, How to Make Friends with Yourself and Influence People, which is a brilliant play on the original How to Make Friends, How to Influence and Make Friends with People, whatever it was called. Um, and in that, it's like one of the greatest ways you can build rapport with someone is actually show interest in them. It's amazing. You just let someone talk about themselves and listen, how soon you'll make a connection with that person. But rapport got almost into this like, well, you've got to parrot, you've got to copy what they say, you've got to, and it just gets silly, and it's still you still see it taught like that. And it's there's a technique, and when people are using it, when they're not using it well, it stands out like a sore thumb. And people really started thinking that if I cross my legs when you cross your legs, perhaps your unconscious mind will decide I'm trustworthy. Um, which my unconscious mind would be like, oh, you're a bit odd, to be honest. Uh, it is an odd foundation for a relationship, you know. Uh, a deeper principle is a lot simpler, and that is that people tend to feel safer when they are met. You know, when you're actually there, no, rather than thinking about how I can make a connection with this person, when you actually just meet that person, when you're actually there with that person, when the pace of the conversation feels right, when they don't have to fight to be heard. When I always remember when I first did years ago, I'd been about 23, doing my introduction to counseling course through the work I was doing. And we'd done the session on active listening, and as all good counselors afterwards we went off to the pub, and we're in this pub in Ludlow, and I think our homework had just been like, oh, try some active listening. We'd only just dropped in there for like a quick half and a chat before going home. 4 hours later, because we'd been trying out this active listening, we'd finally got away. We were just like literally just by meeting people, witnessing people, seeing people, and properly listening to them, their life stories came out. And it ended up like, I really don't know why I've told you all this. And that's because you've created a space where they can be seen and or met, and it makes a real difference. Um, when another person seems to recognize the emotional world that the other person is speaking from, or the frame of reference, the reality that person's coming from. With hypnosis, the worst thing you can do is if someone comes to you and goes, oh, I've got this thing going on and I think it's this, is, I'm trying to think of an example on the fly here, because I've had to deal with it. I'm really struggling to sleep at night, and I think it was because I was once abducted by aliens, and because I can't remember what happened, I really don't sleep well. And a friend of mine went to a therapist who, not with something like that, but when she talked about her own thoughts and beliefs, was told, well, that's a bit nonsense. It's only people with schizophrenia that think that, which is horrendous. That person should have been struck off there and then. Um, but back to the alien example. If someone's then come to me as a hypnotist, say, or as somebody that just wants to listen, and they go about the aliens and this, that, and the other, and I'll go, well, of course you're barking mad. Um, that's not going to help them. Or, oh, I hear what you're saying, but of course it wasn't really aliens, was it? You're just dismissing that whole person's worldview. You're not building rapport, you're putting barriers. Now, we don't really know what those aliens mean for that person. They might think little green people. It might just be their way of rationalizing something that's gone on for them. But the strongest and most powerful way to, one, connect with somebody, and two, help them maybe make changes, is to step into their frame of reference, step into their reality. Um, you're never going to know what it's like to be that person, because they're their own individual person. And even though you may have situations that are very similar, you're not them, they're not you. But you can at least step into their frame of reference. So, If somebody's telling you how they can't sleep because of the aliens, explore why those aliens are stopping them from sleeping. There's no harm in it. And if it gets to a point where they're able to work through what they're working through, it's brilliant. Another thing that they talk about in NLP is calibration, which is like studying another person's face and how they're speaking and what they're doing and how they're moving, and calibrating your own actions to their actions, almost like you would an experiment. Um, and real calibration isn't that. It's becoming interested enough to notice. So when you're talking to somebody, they say something, and if 1 minute they've looked happy, but their expression changes maybe to a bit wistful or a bit sad, it's just noticing the whole person. Noticing that when somebody's speaking, that they might be talking about something, and suddenly their breathing shifts. That maybe they've been quite relaxed in their breathing, and all of a sudden they start talking about something, and their breathing gets quite rapid. And that could be because 101 things. But by noticing these things, by witnessing the whole person, you're connecting deeper in that relationship. Little, someone says, I'm fine, and everything else, from their facial expression to how they're holding their posture, says, I'm not. Um, you know, when we're coming from a place of presence, we notice these things. Presence doesn't immediately go, well, hang on a minute. You're saying you're fine, but you're like, because that's a bit of a slap in the face. Presence doesn't immediately expose stuff. It leaves the room. You know, perhaps you do seem a little quieter than usual, which acknowledges you're seeing something, but you're not fishing for it. You're not trying to slap the answer out of someone. You're literally kind of going, oh, okay, feel fine. Look a bit under the weather, or a bit tired looking, or you seem a little quieter than usual. And it gives an invitation to allow that person to enter into a conversation if they wish to. And that's a lot different from just applying techniques to people. Um, that's a sign of respect. And so, I mean, listening is a difficult thing, especially in a modern day world. There's so much vying for our attention, and we can all think we listen, and we do, but quite often, while somebody's speaking, something else is happening. We're comparing what they are saying with our own experience. If we have a tendency to want to fix things, we can be looking for a solution whilst the person's still talking about what the challenge is. And the moment you're looking for a solution, you're not hearing the whole of the challenge. We're deciding whether we agree or not. Are we coming from a place of judgment when we're listening to people? Or we're preparing what we're going to say next. And if you're preparing what you're going to say next, again, you're going to miss stuff that people are saying. And in wanting and finding those deeper connections where listening and observing is so much a part. Someone that's halfway through describing what happened, and we decide we already know what they should do. And quite often, I think this is well intentioned. We want to help. One thing advice. There are moments when advice is not what creates connection. It's being received that creates connection. Cole Rogers, who I've quoted quite a bit recently because I've wanted to drop the names in of the people who've really inspired me along the way, which is why I've ended up doing all the stuff that I've done. There is an enormous difference between hearing the content of what somebody says and attempting to understand the world from which they're saying it. If somebody says, I'm frightened about starting this new job, I can reply, you'll be fine. It's a really kind intention. I mean well. But I've immediately moved away from their experience. So if somebody says, I'm really frightened about starting this new job, I can say something like, there really is something about starting it that feels frightening. If I want to be a little more subtle and a little bit more kind of whatever hypnotic in my language, then I could say something like, there's something about starting it that's making you feel a little uneasy. So I'm bringing quite frightened down to a little uneasy. And if they nod and agree, we're de-escalating the fear already. They may say, something in response like, yeah, because I keep thinking everybody will know far more than me. Now we've entered into the real conversation. They may eventually discover for themselves, and it's always good when that happens, that they probably will be fine. But they've not had to abandon the fear in order to stay connected to me in that conversation. And that's the real difference. We do, and what we do out here, we also more than not do within ourselves as well. You know, perhaps when it comes to both other people and also listening to ourselves, the most healing response is not always, oh, don't worry. Perhaps sometimes it's like, you're worried. Tell me about that. And there is another side to this. And we've looked at language and use of language in the past, and there's so much more out there. An amazing area of study. I might drop the occasional kind of little bit into the group on language patterns and stuff like that, because I know they've been useful and people have found them interesting along the way. But there is another side to all this. How do we speak honestly? Because we often disguise vulnerable truth. Instead of saying, I felt hurt when that happened, we'll say, you always do this. Instead of saying, I just need some reassurance, we'll say, well, you obviously don't care. Instead of saying, I'm frightened you may leave, we become angry because somebody comes home late. And again, these reactions make sense. Blame feels less vulnerable than need. Anger can feel stronger than hurt. Withdrawal can feel safer than saying, that mattered to me. But the mask obscures the message. The other person hears accusation. They defend against accusation. And the vulnerable truth remains hidden. One of the most powerful shifts we can make in relationships is moving from here's what's wrong with you towards here is what's happening in me. And it's not about becoming passive. If someone behaves badly, you can name that behavior straight away, clearly. But there's a difference between you are selfish and when you made that decision without speaking to me, I felt as though my needs did not matter, which is a much more coherent way of explaining what's going on for yourself. It can still be very strong, very, very powerful way of expressing yourself. Because there's nowhere to hide behind general accusation. It's specific, it's owned, and it's alive. So I'm going to ask you I'm going to take a drink actually. Just take a few moments now. Just take a nice deep breath in. Just close your eyes if it helps. And I want you to just think about one relationship which matters to you. Don't choose the most traumatic or most difficult relationship in your life. Choose something that you can kind of explore comfortably. Might be a partner, a friend, family member, someone who, there's enough relationship there you can notice kind of habitual patterns within that relationship. And if you've all got someone, bring this person gently to mind. And think of a moment when you do not feel entirely secure with them. That might be a time of disagreement, a time of distance, feeling misunderstood. And just think about that moment. What do you do? Do you move towards them? Do you move away? Or do you move against? Do you become more agreeable? Do you become more controlling? Quieter, louder, or more independent? And do not judge the response. We are just interested in what it is trying to accomplish. And so with that in mind, just ask of that response, what am I trying to prevent here? What am I trying to prevent here? Maybe rejection, conflict, being misunderstood, being controlled, looking foolish. What am I trying to prevent here? And whatever that is that you're trying to prevent, now ask yourself, what am I actually needing? What am I actually needing? Maybe a little trickier. Might be security, reassurance, respect, space, understanding, freedom, maybe to a need to be heard. What am I actually needing? And just notice the difference between the behavior and the need. Often the behavior may be complicated, but the underlying need is often remarkably simple. And perhaps ask, does the other person actually know that this is what I need? Does the other person actually know that this is what I need? Sometimes that answer will be yes, but other times the answer is no. And often that's because we've been showing them the defense and hoping that they somehow recognize the need beneath it. So just take a moment to allow that to just settle. Take a nice breath, and if your eyes have been closed, you may choose to open them. You may choose not. You may choose to just listen with your eyes closed, and that's all perfectly okay. When it comes to listening, there is something quite exposing about being properly listened to. Sometimes more exposing than being asked lots and lots of questions. When we're asked lots and lots of questions, we're probed, we're poked, and eventually we can switch off from it. But when we're properly listened to, because, no one rescues us from what we're saying. It goes back to the idea that the solutions, there is what you need to meet any challenge or make any changes lies within you. And when we're listened to properly, it's not the listener that finds a solution. We actually hear ourselves. And when we actually hear ourselves, we sometimes for the first time can realize and see things differently. We can come out with a statement, and it's almost as if we're watching ourselves say it. We've never heard ourselves say it that way before. And from that, the seed of change and transformation can begin. When we're in a situation where we're listened to properly, where people are actually listening, it can feel a little unusual, because a lot of the time when we're having conversations and talking about stuff in life, it's collaborative. Quite often it'll be problem solving, oh, I'm struggling with this at the moment. Oh, well, you know what you need to do, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes not even problem solving. Sometimes it's just, here, do this instead. But as human beings, we also need experiences in which we don't have to become different in order to remain in contact. If somebody is sad and you can sit with them when they are sad, something happens. If you're frightened, but when I share my fear, you share your fears, I don't panic about your fear. Something happens. If I can tell you I'm angry without either of us needing to destroy the relationship, something happens. If you can sit with somebody in whatever emotion they're doing and just hold them in that space without judgment, truly amazing things can happen. The first thing is if you're feeling really hurt about something or sad about something, and somebody sits with you and doesn't judge what you're saying, the first thing it communicates is, I must be okay. I must be all right, because I'm sat here with somebody, and even though I feel bad maybe because I'm angry, this person doesn't seem to be reflecting that back to me. So maybe I'm not bad feeling angry or feeling this way. And our nervous system learns this experience can exist and connection can remain. This experience can exist and connection can remain. I can express myself honestly and truthfully as myself and it not cause division or separation. And that's quite profound. I mean, that's really quite profound. Because many of our masks develop precisely because we once learned the opposite. Perhaps sadness threatened connection, perhaps anger did, perhaps need or disagreement did. And so we hid them, or exaggerated them, or found another route. A different relationship can create different learning. And importantly, that's not only romantic relationships. Friendships can do this. Community can do this. Therapeutic relationships, when they're good, can do this. Personally, I think you have to fish for those a lot harder. Sometimes one deeply trustworthy relationship can begin changing what our nervous system expects from all the others. And it's not overnight, but it's gradually. But gradually, we start to learn to trust differently, to express differently. We can learn that it's okay to be us in a good relationship, which then affects the other relationships, because the more comfortable we are in being us, the more comfortable other people will be when we're being us. So we're going to look at the place where we first learned the mask. And this will touch a little bit on what we were looking at a little bit back. I want to be very clear, we're not trying to recover hidden memories. Memory is not a video recording. The mind may produce something remembered, imagined, symbolic, or a mixture of all three. And this isn't about establishing historic fact. We're just interested in kind of the emotional pattern, the experience of having learned to keep connection. As in, to keep connection, I need to become this, or be this way, or do this thing. Or to remain safe, I must stop showing this emotion, that emotion, etc. And we're going to allow the adult you, with everything you know now, to bring another possibility into that old pattern. We're not rewriting history, we're just giving the nervous system another experience to rehearse. So, get yourselves comfortable. Allowing your body to settle, have a fidget. We're going to take 3 deep breaths together. And whenever you're ready, be it on the first breath, the second breath, or the third breath, to allow your eyes to close and relax. You can just allow your eyes to close and relax with each breath. Breathing in, hold it, and breathe out. Breathing in, hold it, and relax. Breathing in, hold it, and relax. As you continue to breathe and hear my voice, just notice the support underneath you. There is nothing you have to hold up alone for these next few minutes. Just feel the breath moving. And perhaps just allow your attention to move gently inward. Sounds can remain, thoughts can remain. Everything can belong. And I want you to begin to imagine somewhere you feel able to be yourself. It might be a place you know. It might be somewhere out in nature. Or it might be somewhere completely made up. Just a place in which there is no need or no demand to perform. And just allow yourself to be there. See what you see, hear what you hear, feel what you feel. And just notice what your body feels like when it does not have to monitor itself so closely. Perhaps the breathing changes, perhaps the face softens, perhaps simply a sense of more room. And from this place, imagine, think, pretend that you become aware of a younger version of yourself somewhere nearby. Not necessarily a child self, but a younger version of you. Just to let your unconscious mind decide. Perhaps an age when some important relational learning was taking place. And you do not need a clear memory. You may just simply get a sense of this younger you. And notice just how that younger you holds themselves, how they carry themselves. How do they try to stay connected? Do they become good, quiet, funny, useful, invisible, strong? No need to analyze. Just notice whatever comes. And perhaps you understand without needing a story that this younger version learned something. Something like, if I do this, I belong. Or if I show this part of myself, something difficult happens. And so the young mind did what young minds do. It adapted. And so you can approach that younger you now, not as somebody arriving to tell them they misunderstood everything. You know more than they did because you've lived longer. But they understood something about the world they inhabited. So just be with that younger you. Just sit with them. Maybe they're a bit unsure initially, and that's fine. Just let them see you, the person they eventually became. And perhaps say, I know why you learned this. I know you were trying to stay connected. Or safe. Or loved, whatever belongs. There is nothing wrong with you for having learned it. Perhaps the younger you has spent years believing that this adaptation was simply who they were. And now you can say, it was something you learned to do. That's different. Something learned can become more flexible. Perhaps ask, what were you afraid would happen if you stopped? And listen. Maybe people would be angry. Maybe they'd leave. Maybe you'd become too much. Maybe no one would need you. Just whatever comes. Allow the adult you to receive it. And don't reassure too quickly. First, understand. And perhaps say, that makes sense. Not it was true forever, that it made sense then. And so look around this earlier world. Perhaps notice something that the younger you could not yet know. That time would pass. That they would grow. That they would meet different people. That they would have choices they did not have then. That leaving a room would become possible, saying no would become possible, asking for help would become possible. That not everyone would respond in the same way. And perhaps they do not have to believe all of that immediately. You can simply let them see evidence that time continued. And perhaps offer them something they needed then, not necessarily words, presence. Sit beside them. Let them experience having a feeling without being abandoned. If they are frightened, remain. If they are angry, remain. If they cry, remain. If they say nothing, remain. Nothing to fix. And perhaps the body begins learning something very quietly. I can be as I am, and connection can remain. I can be as I am, and connection can remain. And allow that to become an experience, not just a sentence. Perhaps invite that younger part to show you the mask they learned to wear. Maybe you see it, maybe you just simply sense it. There's no need to destroy it. It helped. Just take it gently in your hands. Thank it. It knew how to survive a particular world. And ask that younger you, do you want to keep wearing this all the time? Maybe there's a yes or no. Maybe they're not sure. All answers are acceptable. If they want to take it off, let them. If they want to keep it nearby, that's fine. We're not replacing force with a different kind of force. Perhaps what matters is simply that the mask can now become optional. A tool, not a face. And maybe you can show this younger version what connection can look like now. Imagine someone in your current life with whom you can be a little more yourself. They do not need to be perfect, just someone with whom there is a sense of safety. And allow that younger you to see that relationship, to see a moment when you said something real and the world did not collapse. A moment when you were imperfect and still welcome. A moment when somebody stayed. And if no particular person comes, just imagine the possibility. Our nervous systems learn through experience and rehearsal. And perhaps the younger you can begin to realize the old rule was not wrong. The old rule was not wrong. It was local. It belonged to a particular time, a particular set of circumstances. It does not have to govern every relationship. Perhaps ask, what would you like to remember when I feel unsafe with someone now? And listen. Maybe it's do not abandon me. Speak, slow down. Don't assume they're leaving. Let me have space. Ask what is actually happening. And whatever comes, promise only what you can genuinely promise. Maybe I'll try to listen before I react. Or I will not shame you for being frightened, and I will remember that I have choices now. And let that settle. And perhaps the younger version can come with you or remain in that safe place. Allow your unconscious to decide. And slowly now allow yourself to return more clearly to your adult body, person here tonight, where you're sitting or lying. Become aware of your chest, the abdomen, the face. And just notice that even this adult body may still run some very old relational patterns. That's understandable. But there is more awareness now. And just imagine an ordinary future moment. Someone you care about seems distant. The old reaction begins. Perhaps you move towards, away, against. But then there is a little recognition. Something in me feels unsafe. Not they're definitely leaving, or I'm definitely being rejected, or anything like that. Just something in me feels a little unsafe, a little insecure. And just notice the difference. And then ask, what do I need? And what do I actually know? Maybe you need reassurance, space, conversation. Maybe the other person is simply having a difficult day. And now imagine yourself speaking from the need rather than the defense. Perhaps, I noticed I became anxious when we stopped talking earlier. Or, I need a little time before I can talk about this properly. Or, when that happened, I felt hurt. Simple responses owned by you. And perhaps the other person receives it well. Perhaps they don't. Authenticity does not control the other person's response. But something important has happened anyway. You have remained in relationship with yourself. You have shown them the person rather than only the defense. And that is the part you can choose. So imagine listening to somebody you love and they're telling you something difficult. Notice the impulse to fix or to defend. Maybe an impulse to say, but that isn't what I meant. And instead, for a few seconds longer, you remain with their experience. You might say, I want to understand, and then listen. Notice that understanding them does not automatically mean agreeing. It simply means allowing their experience to exist long enough to become known. And perhaps that creates enough safety for both of you to become less defended. Not perfectly. Human relationships are messier than that. But enough. And perhaps there is a recognition. Love is not the absence of defense. Love is partly the place where defense can gradually become unnecessary. You do not need to be unguarded with everybody. Some people have not earned access to your vulnerability. Boundaries are not masks. Discernment is not avoidance. The aim is not to expose yourself indiscriminately. The aim is to recognize where the armor is no longer needed and to discover whether you can loosen it. Perhaps one strap, one piece, enough to breathe. Perhaps that is how intimacy grows, not through one enormous act of disclosure, through hundreds of moments of this is a little more true, a little more honest, a little more seen. And each time the relationship survives truth, something learns. I can be here. You can be there. We do not need to disappear into each other, and neither of us needs to disappear from ourselves. Just allow those ideas to settle somewhere beneath conscious thought. You do not need to remember every word. Perhaps the useful learning will show itself later, in a pause before responding, in a moment when you notice yourself withdrawing, in a conversation where you say the truer sentence. And so begin now to become aware of the room. Feel the support beneath you. Listen to any sounds. Take a fuller breath in. Perhaps move the fingers, the shoulders. And when you're ready, allow your eyes to open. Just take your time. And welcome back. Give yourself a moment. Just allow the experience to settle. So there is something wonderfully obvious that we forget, and other people cannot reliably know what we've not told them. And yet we often expect them to. If they loved me, they'd know. Perhaps sometimes people do know, but often they do not. May have spent 40 years becoming incredibly good at hiding exactly the thing you know. Now expect another person to know. And then we become hurt because, well, they missed it. And this is why learning to articulate need matters. Not demand, need. There's a difference. A demand says, you must do this so that I can be okay. A need says, this is what's happening within. Then relationship begins negotiating reality. Sometimes the other person can meet the need. Sometimes they cannot. Perhaps there's another way. Sometimes the need tells us something we need to provide for ourselves. But at least the real conversation has begun. And authenticity carries another risk. You can speak clearly and still be misunderstood. You can explain beautifully and the other person may not agree. You can say, this hurt me, and they may say, I don't see it that way. And then we reach the part of a relationship where no communication technique gives us complete control. The other person remains other. They have their own map, their own parts, their own fears, their own history. And perhaps mature relationship is partly the capacity to tolerate that. Or accept. I prefer the word accept. I can tell you the truth of my experience without requiring you to experience it exactly as I do. I can listen to your experience without surrendering mine. There can be two realities in one room. There always is. I mean, it's not the easiest of things all the time, but it's also where genuine encounter becomes possible. Because the alternative is not relationship, it's negotiation over whose map gets to become reality. And there's one final relationship which sits beneath all the others, and that is your relationship with you. Because if every difficult feeling immediately leads to self-criticism, relationship becomes unsafe inside before anybody else has ever entered. If I'm frightened and then shame myself for fear, I abandon myself. If I need reassurance, then mock myself for being needy, I abandon myself. If I become angry and immediately decide that anger makes me a bad person, I am abandoning myself. And then perhaps I become desperate for another person to provide the acceptance I'm withholding from myself. So letting love in also means learning to remain present with yourself, not becoming entirely self-sufficient. We need people, but perhaps the deepest relationship becomes easier when the other person is not required to save us from our own inner rejection. I can need you without requiring you to complete me. I can love you without disappearing into you. I can disagree and remain connected. I can be alone without becoming abandoned. These are not states we achieve once, they are practices. Mm. And so, just before we finish, I invite you each to consider one relationship in your life where you would like to show up a little differently. Not to change the other person, your part, perhaps. I will listen before I defend. I will say what I actually need. I'll stop pretending I'm fine when I'm not. I will allow more space, or I will ask rather than assume. I will stop chasing reassurance and first notice what is happening in me. Just whatever belongs to you. No grand promise, just one little shift, because every time we change one little thing, reality shifts. One little small relational experiment. And if you'd like to, just put that into practice. Just that one thing. We use the word love very easily, but love is not merely a feeling, and it's certainly not the absence of difficulty. Some of the relationships we love most challenge us precisely because they matter. People misunderstand us. We misunderstand them. Old wounds get activated. We become frightened, defensive, clumsy. We say the wrong thing. We fail to say the right thing. That's the beauty of human relationship. The aim is not to become two perfectly healed people who never trigger one another again. I don't even think that's possible. Or if it is, I think there's a certain level of denial going on. Perhaps what matters is becoming a little more able to recognize when the mask has taken over. The moment when hurt becomes accusation. The moment when need becomes control. The moment when fear becomes withdrawal. And in that moment, perhaps there can be a pause. What is really happening in me? What am I protecting? What do I need? Can I say that instead? And perhaps when somebody we love becomes defensive, we can sometimes remember that something may be happening beneath their defense too. And that's not to excuse everything, not to tolerate cruelty, but to remember curious enough, to remain curious enough that we do not immediately reduce the whole person to their worst reaction. So this is what I think is meant by the saying love without the mask. Not living without rules, not being vulnerable with everybody, not telling everybody everything. It's actually something quieter. It's knowing when you're hiding, knowing why, and gradually discovering where it's safe enough to become more visible, to say, this is what I feel. This is what I need. This is what matters. This is where I'm frightened. And perhaps finding sometimes that the person in front of you does not run. and then something changes. A small piece of armor becomes unnecessary. A little more of you enters the relationship, and perhaps they become a little braver too. And that's how connection deepens with others and ourselves, not by finding somebody who never touches our wounds, but through relationships in which we gradually discover that the wound does not always have to decide what happens next. So this week, notice the mask, notice the defense, and when it is safe to do so, perhaps allow one slightly truer sentence. Listen for one moment longer. Remain with yourself while you remain with them. Because perhaps love's not finally about losing ourselves in another person. Perhaps the deepest connection becomes possible when neither of us has to disappear in order for us to meet. Indeed.